Hi, this is Ryan Johnson. Thanks for watching my macro advocacy video on kinship diversion and what could be done to change the negative impact of kinship diversion in New York State. First, let me give you an overview of what kinship care is. Kinship care is when a relative takes care of another relative's children. So it could be a grandmother taking care of a grandchild. It could be a godparent taking care of a godchild. So that's what kinship care is. And children enter into kinship care for the same reasons that they might enter into foster care. Their parents were unable to care for them, whether it be they were deployed on military action, or they were imprisoned, or they died, or they were unfit because of abuse or neglect. So what is kinship diversion? According to Annie E. Casey, kinship diversion is situations in which a child welfare agency investigates a report of child abuse or neglect, determines that a child cannot remain safely with parents or guardians, and helps to facilitate that child's care by a relative instead of bringing the child into state custody. So essentially that means that a child welfare worker has been called into a family's house. They are going to remove the child from the house, and they show up at a relative's door and say, if you don't take this child, the state is going to take custody of this child, put them into foster care, and you may not know where they are. And so oftentimes a family member will take the child, and the child welfare worker will then close the case and say that the child is safe, and they don't need any more services now that the child is safe. What is the prevalence of kinship diversion? In 2013, there were 18,901 children in foster care in New York State, and 4,356 of those, or around 23%, were in approved relative homes, which the Office of Child and Family Services approved relative homes are formal kinship foster homes, while a certified foster home is the generic license for a foster family. So a foster family can either be approved as a kinship foster home or certified as a non-relative foster home. So you might say to yourself, 23%, that seems relatively high for the number of children in foster care. But Annie E. Casey estimates that there are approximately 153,000 children who are living in kinship care in New York State. And so 4,356 children receiving the foster care benefits of being in kinship foster care is only 2% of that number. The reason that it's an approximate number is because there is no data and there's no way to track exactly how many kinship families there are in the state, because of the fact that these diversion practices are happening and the child welfare process does not track any data when they divert families away from foster care and into kinship care. So most of these diversion cases go undocumented and oftentimes are known as informal placements. Sometimes caregivers may even have no legal right to make any decisions for the children in their care, such as medical decisions or school decisions. So that's the prevalence of kinship diversion. The benefits of kinship care for children is, there's multiple, but a couple that I've highlighted are stability. Oftentimes, children are more likely to be in a permanent caregiver's home after 3 years, according to a study that I reference in my PowerPoint, than a child who's in foster care. So what happens is a child may act out and move from foster care home to foster care home. But when they're with a kinship family, when they're with their own relatives, they often tend to find more permanency with that family member. And retaining family ties is important in helping a child to form family identity. It also is beneficial for children in their emotional health. So children in kinship care experience significantly lower rates and risks of behavioral problems and poor social skills compared to children in foster care. And kinship care may also be beneficial in preventing escalation of behavioral problems. The comparison of non-kinship families, non-foster kinship families, and foster families is fairly stark. And so I wanted to highlight for you just very quickly what some of the differences were between a non-foster kinship family and a foster family. So a kinship household tends to be poorer Caregivers are older. It's about 60% of kinship caregivers are grandparents. So they tend to be older. They tend to be more often single, unemployed, on fixed income, and not high school graduates. The primary source of financial assistance for kinship families are the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Non-Parent Caregiver Grant, known as the NPC grants, also known as the Child Only Grant. So about 22% of upstate New York kinship families receive the NPC grant, and about 5% of kinship families in New York City receive the NPC grant. The average amount of the NPC grant tends to be between $400 and $600, and that in New York State is one of the higher amounts across the country. Other states go as low as $85 a month per child. Just to be clear, for one child it's between $400 and $600, but for multiple children it does not increase by $400 to $600. It increases by about $100 per month per each child after one. So a foster family, in contrast, receives a higher stipend. They also receive a housing allowance, clothing allowance, transportation allowance, school-related expenses, camp fees, protection against damage or loss to property, and miscellaneous fees. So there's a lot more financial support available through the foster care subsidy. Foster families also receive parent training, case management services, respite services, and have access to peer support groups. But kinship families who are not in the foster care system don't have access to these same resources. So who does diversion impact? Now remember, diversion, we're talking about diverting these families away from foster care. So who does it impact the most? Annie E. Casey reports that diversion from foster care disproportionately affects and disadvantages families of color, effectively denying them an opportunity to receive the higher stipends and more intensive services offered through licensed kinship foster care. Over 1/3, there's 35% of children in non-parent care are non-Hispanic Black. In New York State, that number equates to 53,550 children are Black. That is very disproportionate to the number of Black children in the state. It's actually 1 in 3 children are Black. So that's a pretty high number. So what can be done? The first thing that can be done is tracking diversion in the child welfare system. At this very point in time, most of these cases are going undocumented. So they have contact with the child welfare system. Child welfare system diverts them into a family's home and closes the case, and there's no record of that. Anecdotally, a caseworker might report that in their case notes, but there's no way to track that unless you were to go through every case note of every caseworker to determine how prevalent the practice is. So tracking diversion in the child welfare system in New York State is the first step to figuring out how big of an issue this actually is, as well as starting to understand how to address this problem. Some counties state that their numbers of approved foster families, so approved kinship foster families, are low, but that their number of certified families are high. But OCFS also does not track the number of certified kinship families. So they don't delineate between a regular foster family and a kinship foster family who's certified. So OCFS has recently started tracking that. That will be helpful. The second thing that can be done is the development and implementation of a family needs assessment tool. So we're looking for equity, not equality. Not every kinship family needs to have foster care supports, but the ones that do should have access to it and not be diverted away. With an implementation of a family needs assessment tool, families will be assessed by a child welfare worker for their support system, their financial stability, and with that be recommended to take parent support groups, parent training, and get the financial stability that comes with foster care. The third thing that can be done is understanding the impact of childhood trauma and incorporating evidence-based practices into assessment, screens, and treatment plans. Children in care have experienced higher rates of trauma, and their needs will subsequently be higher. Placing them with kin and not putting in supports for the family is detrimental to the child's well-being. So being sure that we're being trauma-informed and supplying families with the supports financially and peer supports that they need is important. And lastly, creating a regulatory mandate that CPS workers push for kinship families to be licensed in foster care families when the family demonstrates a high need. Utilizing the assessment tool, creating a mandate that says workers need to be pushing for families to be certified as a foster parent and a foster family to receive the supports for the trauma-informed care that these children need. Thanks for watching my presentation.